successful and a holding against at all times.
Be careful.
Government officials insist that this is isolated and significant of the package for him.
It was a cold, dark night in 1735. The wind howled through the gnarled pines, twisting and bending like spectral fingers clawing at the sky. The rain, thick and unrelenting, pounded against the wooden cabin in the heart of the New Jersey wilderness, a place known to the locals as the Pine Barrens. Inside, lit only by the dim, flickering glow of a dying hearth, a woman lay writhing in labor pains. The matriarch of the Leeds family, called Mother Leeds. Her face was slick with sweat, her breath dragged, her cries of pain rivaled the thunder outside. This was no ordinary childbirth, the midwives thought to themselves. The midwives were attentive to Mother Leeds, but it didn't stop them from whispering among themselves, their hands trembling as they wiped her brow. This was her 13th child. Some say Mother Leeds had been cursed. Others claim she was a witch. She had made a deal with something ancient and evil. The darkest story of all says that that night, as she screamed in agony, her voice twisted into something primal as she uttered the words that would damn the child before it even entered the world.
Let this one be the devil.
The room fell dead quiet and the midwives stepped back in horror until the sharp wail of a newborn baby shattered the silence. But something wasn't right. The cries morphed. They warped into a high-pitched screech, unnatural and ear-piercing. The midwives were frozen in fear. At first, the baby seemed normal. It was adorable, small, fragile, human. But soon, they say its body began to change. The soft pink flesh darkened and stretched, splitting open like old leather. Tiny fingers curled inward, nails elongating into razor-sharp claws. Its legs twisted, warping into hooves, its spine arching unnaturally as bat-like wings erupted from its back. The newborn's face, once beautiful, once innocent, once human, now elongated into the snarling visage of a beast. The midwives tried to scream, but they couldn't. Their voices failed them, but the creature, the thing that had been born that night in the cabin, it screamed for all of them. It was a shrill, unearthly shriek that echoed well beyond the walls of the cabin and resonated through the Pine Barrens. After releasing its bellowing cry, it lashed out, tearing into the nearest midwife, her blood splattering across the wooden walls. Their friend's life snatched in an instant, the others frantically stumbled backward in terror, their feet slipping in the pooling crimson beneath their feet. The creature, unfazed, unfurled its wings, its eyes glowing like burning embers, and then it shot up the chimney, embers scattered everywhere as it disappeared into the storm and into the night. The air full of thunder, screams, and the sound of wings beating against the night air. And that, my friends, is how the Jersey Devil was born, or so the legend goes. For over 300 years, people have reported sightings of a winged, hoofed demon lurking in the Pine Barrens, a creature that screams in the night, its eyes burning red, its presence often considered an omen of disaster. Decades later, in 1778, the American Revolution was raging across the colonies, and the British Empire was fighting desperately to reclaim control. But on the shores of New Jersey, beneath the dense canopy of the Pine Barrens, a different kind of battle was about to unfold. A battle not against men, but against something far worse. Commodore Stephen Decatur was a rising star in the Continental Navy, a brilliant tactician, a respected officer, and a man with no patience for superstition. He believed in gunpowder, steel, and the power of a well-aimed cannon. The sun had just begun to set, casting long golden shadows over the firing range outside a Continental Army outpost. Decatur and his men had gathered there to test a new set of cannonballs, massive iron spheres meant to rip through British warships with merciless precision. The first shot thundered across the range, shaking the very ground beneath their feet. Decatur stepped forward. He nodded approvingly. The cannonball had obliterated its wooden target, turning it into splinters. But then, there was a sudden shift in the air. The wind died down and they were wrapped in an eerie stillness. Something moved in the sky. Decatur turned sharply, his acute naval instincts sensing an unfamiliar presence. Above the darkening treetops, silhouetted against the fading red sun, a strange shape appeared. At first it was just a shadow, a dark figure moving too quickly, too smoothly against the sky. But as it drew nearer, the men began to see details. It had wings, massive bat-like wings that stretched beyond any bird they had ever seen. It had an elongated neck. Its head was like a twisted, nightmarish version of a goat or horse. Its eyes burned red, flickering like embers in a dying fire, and then it screamed. That sharp, unearthly shriek ripped through the air, high-pitched, almost metallic, as though it had a tortured soul trapped in its lungs. The men froze. Some clutched their muskets, others stumbled backwards, but Decatur, he didn't hesitate. With the precision of a seasoned officer, he strode forward and shouted a single command.
Ready the cannon!
The soldiers scrambled, voices shouting, cannon wheels rolling into position. The men loaded another round, their hands trembling but obedient. Decatur himself took aim, his trained eyes locked onto the monstrous figure overhead. The creature circled once, its wings flapping heavily as though deciding whether or not to attack. Decatur narrowed his eyes.
Fire!
The cannon let loose, a massive, earth-shaking blast. The whistle of the cannonball cut through the air at terrifying speed. The shot was perfect, a direct hit. The iron ball landed squarely in the creature's torso, striking it cleanly, dead center. Or at least it should have. They all stood in stunned silence. The beast was still flying over them. It did not fall. It did not even flinch. Decatur watched in horrified disbelief as the cannonball passed right through the creature's core, as though it were made of smoke or shadow. The beast hovered there, untouched, its glowing eyes fixated on them. And then it let out a second deafening screech before beating its wings and vanishing into the night. The men stood there, overwhelmed with fear and confusion. They now stared in the sky where the creature had been. Decatur lowering the cannon's scope, his hands gripping the wood so tightly his knuckles had turned white. For the first time in his career, he had fired at something that should have died, but didn't. A battle-hardened naval officer, a man who faced down the British Empire without fear, stood before something unnatural, something that defied reality as he knew it. The cannonball should have torn through flesh and bone, but it didn't. What exactly did Decatur and his men see that day? Was it a trick of the light, a hallucination? A bird misidentified in the heat of the moment? Or did he witness something older than the revolution? Something older than the burgeoning nation itself, something lurking in the Pine Barrens long before the first settlers ever arrived. Fast forward another 4 decades to the year 1820. The war was over. The revolution had passed. The colonies had become a new nation, one still finding its footing in a world that did not yet take it seriously. And yet in the dense, snow-covered forest of New Jersey, a man who had once ruled an empire found himself utterly alone. He was the older brother of Napoleon Bonaparte. His name was Joseph Bonaparte, the former king of Spain, and a man now living in self-imposed exile in America. He had lost his throne, his brother had lost his war, but none of that mattered in this moment, because on one cold winter night in the silent depths of the Pine Barrens, Joseph Bonaparte encountered something that no amount of royal power could explain. Joseph was hunting alone that evening. He had always been fond of the sport. It reminded him of his youth in France, of the grand estates and royal forest he once commanded. Now, in this strange foreign land, all he had was his rifle, his horse, and the endless, eerie stillness of the New Jersey woods. The world was hushed under a fresh coat of snow. The moon hung high, casting long, skeletal shadows across the frozen ground. Suddenly, there was a single, distant rustling noise. Just barely audible, almost like something moving between the trees. Joseph paused, his breath visible in the cold air. He tightened his grip upon his rifle. He sensed something wasn't right, and then he saw them. The tracks. At first glance, they looked like hoof prints, as if a deer had passed through just moments prior. But as Joseph knelt to inspect them, a chill crawled up his spine. These were no ordinary tracks. The prints were deep and unnatural, too far apart, as though whatever had left them wasn't walking but leaping in great impossible strides. And then there was the shape. The hoof marks were split, not in the clean, rounded shape of a horse or deer, but jagged, like something with cloven hooves, or something with feet that didn't quite belong to this world. The wind chilled his neck and shook the trees. Then something unseen shifted in the distance. Joseph straightened, suddenly aware of how quiet the woods had become. Even his horse, normally steady and unbothered, was trembling beneath him. And then, a shrill, inhuman shriek ripped through the frigid air. Unnatural, ear-piercing, something between a horse's cry and a woman's scream, twisted into something unholy. Joseph whirled around, his heart slammed against his ribs, and that was when he saw it. Perched on a low, gnarled branch, partially hidden in the shadows, was a creature unlike anything he had ever seen. It had the head of a horse, but its eyes burned red, shining like twin lanterns in a fog of shadow, flickering with an eerie, restless glow. Its wings, massive, bat-like, stretched out from its narrow, bony shoulders. The thin, leathery membrane twitched as though it was deciding whether to take flight. In its tail, long, serpentine, curled through the snow, it twitched like a coiled snake preparing to strike. Joseph Bonaparte felt fear that night unlike any other. He who had once commanded armies, who stood before thousands of men and faced the horrors of war, had faced nothing like this. It let out another sharp, guttural shriek that penetrated his soul. The creature moved, shifting its weight onto its crooked hind legs, its wings unfurling just slightly. Joseph knew what was coming next. He took a deep breath. Then out leapt the sharp crack of a rifle being cocked. With steady hands, he raised his gun, years of training overriding his fear. He took aim. He fired. The deafening explosion of the gunshot echoed through the barrens. The bullet struck, or should have struck. In that split second, the beast moved too fast, vanishing into the shadowy depths of the pines. All he heard now was the sound of rustling branches and wings flapping in the distance. Then the night fell silent. Joseph eventually lowered his rifle and sat there in disbelief. The only proof of what had happened were the hoofprints in the snow and the lingering echo of that terrible scream still ringing in his ears. Joseph Bonaparte never spoke of that night in public, but in private, he told his closest friends and confidants about what he had seen, about the terrifying creature that watched him from the trees. And those friends, they passed the story down, through whispers, through warnings, through generations of hunters and travelers who still say that deep in the Pine Barrens, if you listen carefully enough, you can still hear the shriek of the Jersey Devil. It would be almost a century before there'd be another notable report of the devil, but when he broke his silence, it was like one of those screams. Those familiar with Jersey Devil lore all know about the Great Panic of 1909. It's 89 years later, but once again it started with the snow. A thick, heavy blanket of white silence stretching over towns and villages across New Jersey, Delaware, and Pennsylvania. The snow hushed the world, muting the sound of footsteps, voices, even breath itself, until strange footprints started to appear. These cloven prints were found in backyards, alleyways, schoolyards, trailing from one rooftop to another. They crossed rivers and fences as if gravity itself meant nothing. It appeared as though something had walked through the towns in the dead of night, and whatever it was still out there. It began in Woodbury, New Jersey on Monday, January 16th of 1909. A merchant shoveling snow outside his shop noticed something strange. Hoofprints, deep and perfectly pressed into the fresh snow. At first he thought nothing of it, until he decided to follow them. They traveled up the road, winding between buildings, fences, across porches, and then he noticed they continued up a wall. The prints climbed straight up the side of a house, then across the roof, then down the other side, as if whatever had made them could walk on vertical surfaces with ease. News spread quickly after that. By the afternoon, entire towns had begun finding the same tracks, some stretching for miles as though the creature never stopped, never slept. But footprints alone weren't enough to send the entire region into a frenzy of terror. That came later, when some of the people began seeing it with their own eyes. Tuesday the 17th. The following evening in Bristol, Pennsylvania, a man named E.W. Minster, a respected postal worker, saw something that would haunt him the rest of his life. As Minster stepped outside, he caught a glimpse of a monstrous figure standing on the roof of a nearby house. Its body was thin and elongated, its bat-like wings half spread, casting long shadows against the moonlit snow, and its eyes were like two raging candles in the night. Burned red, unblinking, and staring directly at him. For a moment, neither man nor beast moved. But then, the sound of hooves scraping against a rooftop, followed by a rush of wind and something leaping into the air. Its heavy wings beat the sky. The creature took flight, vanishing into the night, leaving nothing behind but the hollow, lingering echo of its unearthly scream. Things would escalate Wednesday, January the 18th. That morning, the city of Camden, New Jersey, was in full panic. The streets were bustling with gossip as a newspaper boy shouted the headline,
"Mysterious Bee stalks New Jersey! Mysterious Bee stalks New Jersey!"
It's all anyone could talk about. That evening, a trolley car was attacked. The passengers claimed they saw a winged creature swoop down, clawing at the roof before disappearing into the shadows. Police officers, skeptical at first, patrolled the streets with rifles drawn. Then, just after midnight, two Camden officers saw something perched upon a telephone pole. Its glowing eyes were fixed on them. They quickly raised their guns. They fired. The shots rang out. They echoed through the snow-coated alleyways, along with the sound of wings beating furiously against the wind. The bullets hit, but did nothing. The creature let out a bone-rattling shriek, then took off into the night, unharmed. Something was very, very wrong. It was now Thursday, January 19th, 1909. Widespread hysteria had hit. By Thursday, the Jersey Devil had been reported in dozens of towns. It was seen hovering above rooftops in Haddon Heights. It was spotted outside homes in Collingswood, scratching at the windows. It chased a farmer's dog in Burlington. The dog was never seen again after that. Businesses were shut down, schools closed their doors, mobs formed, armed with pitchforks, rifles, torches, the whole nine. Whole towns marched into the Pine Barrens, determined to hunt the elusive beast haunting their town. But they found nothing, only hoofprints in the snow and in the dirt, leading deeper and deeper into the woods. Friday the 20th arrived, and all of it suddenly stopped. As quickly as the nightmare began, the sightings simply ceased. By Friday morning, the Jersey Devil had vanished. There were no new tracks, no more attacks, no more piercing cries in the dead of night. Newspapers ran wild with speculation. Was it all a hoax? Was it simply mass hysteria? Or had the creature simply returned to the shadows to wait? The Great Panic of 1909 had ended. Hundreds of eyewitnesses, dozens of towns were terrorized, and not one solid explanation. What really happened that week? Did the Jersey Devil emerge to solidify its legend into reality? Or was it something else? A hoax spun out of control, a trick of the mind, a fear so contagious it became real to all these people. Was the Jersey Devil truly among us? If it was, is it truly gone? Or is it still out there, waiting for another long winter's night to return? Along with the questions about where it had gone were still the questions. Where did it come from? They had all heard the stories about the Leeds family. Was the Jersey Devil really a supernatural curse? A witch's bargain gone wrong? Or could it be something else? Was it merely a piece of political propaganda, a distortion of history, or even a real undiscovered creature that has managed to evade capture all these years? Today we're diving into one of America's oldest cryptid mysteries, tracing its origins, its terrifying encounters, and the possibility that something is still out there in the dark woods of New Jersey. Welcome back to The Dancing Toaster. My name is Nelly, and The Dancing Toaster is a podcast that wrestles with the intersection of faith and the paranormal. We are 6 episodes into our second season together, only 18 total, but feels like way more than that with all the stuff we've talked about. Last week we covered the Mothman of Point Pleasant, and today we travel almost 500 miles east of West Virginia to a state that has an official state demon. We're in New Jersey, and today is about the infamous Jersey Devil. Today's opener had a ton of history and historical figures in it, which reminds me that last week I had a wonderful conversation with the host of Southern Gothic, Mr. Brandon Schexnayder, a great storyteller who's got a show that covers tons of haunted history. He's got a lot of overlap with what we do here on The Dancing Toaster, minus the faith-based element. He's been doing this way longer than me, and he took the time to share a ton of wisdom with me about the podcasting world, and I'm really big on gratitude. So Brandon, if you hear this, thank you. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule to share with me and encourage me. Toasties, if you love haunted history, I think you'll enjoy it. When you run out of episodes here, go show Brandon and Southern Gothic some love. And if you enjoy what I'm doing here, there are tons of ways to show me some love. You can start by liking, sharing, subscribing, following, reviewing. I know I'm a broken record, but doing all that stuff really helps me out. It helps other people know the show is worth checking out. If you're able to go a step further, you can support the work through buymeacoffee.com. If you want to support on a regular basis, hit me up on Patreon. $5 a month will not only contribute to the work, but it'll get you access to the exclusive content coming at the end of this month. I got a special show launching at the end of February called The Man-Eating Toaster, a show that will cover cults and crimey things, starting with the infamous UFO cult called Heaven's Gate. They left a horrible mark on history, more like a skid mark on history. Our cryptids history today began in the early 1700s, when Mother Leeds supposedly gave birth to the Jersey Devil. He wasn't always called the Jersey Devil, though. The earliest accounts of this being refer to it as the Leeds Devil. This name likely originated from the Leeds family, particularly Mama Leeds herself. Now, who was she? Some say she was a woman named Deborah Smith, becoming Leeds after she married. She was a real historical woman and the real-life wife of Japhet Leeds, a man who lived in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey in the early 1700s. One of the pieces of historical connecting tissue was Japhet Leeds' last will and testament. This document, dated 1736, lists 12 children, which aligns eerily with the legend that Mother Leeds' 13th child was cursed. The Leeds family also lived in what is now Atlantic County, New Jersey, in an area where many early sightings of the Jersey Devil were reported. The legend of the Jersey Devil claims that Deborah Leeds, or Mama Leeds, gave birth to her 13th child in 1735, and that the baby transformed into a monster the night of its birth. However, Dr. Wright, I'd like to welcome you back so you can shed some light on Mama Leeds for us.
I was wondering when you was going to be quiet. There is no historical evidence to suggest that Deborah Leeds was accused of witchcraft of any kind, or that she cursed her child, or that she even had a 13th child at all. This bizarre origin story appears to have been an exaggeration or distortion over time, one that blended real historical figures with folklore, and maybe even some slander.
You may be shocked by this, Doc, but I can't argue with you this time. Some historians believe that this Jersey Devil origin story actually grew from political and religious conflicts involving the Leeds family earlier in the 1700s, rather than from a literal cursed birth. The Leeds family was one of the earliest English settler families in New Jersey. They were influential landowners, but their involvement in religion, politics, and publishing made them a target of public scorn.
Well, I'll be. You might have a chance, boy. Well, yes, the origins of the Leeds Devil legends can be traced back to Daniel Leeds, father of Japhet, a British Quaker who immigrated to New Jersey in the late 1600s. Daniel was a prominent writer and intellectual, but his views clashed with the strict Quaker community occupying the region.
Who were the Quakers, Doc?
The Quakers, also known as the Religious Society of Friends, were a Christian movement that emerged in England during the mid-1600s. They were founded by a man named George Fox. a man who rejected the rigid religious structures of the time and believed in a direct personal experience of God without the need for priests, rituals, or formal church services.
Well, some of that sounds good, but some of it sounds a little off, right?
Well, Quakers emphasized simplicity, equality, and inner spirituality rather than outward religious displays. One of their beliefs I find the most unsettling was that called the inner light. Quakers believe that God speaks directly to every person through an inner light, a personal, spiritual connection that doesn't require clergy or churches.
Ouch, I can see how that might be problematic.
Oh, you bet your rear end. Because of this, Quakers rejected formal sermons, sacraments, and church hierarchies. I'm all for a personal relationship with Jesus, but Quakers taught that God spoke directly to individuals through this so-called inner light, meaning they saw divine revelation as ongoing. This is troublesome for folks even today.
I think people also might be upset today, Doctor, that we're on the same page for so much of this. The Quakers challenged the mainstream Christian beliefs that God's revelation ended with the Bible, leading some to accuse Quakers of promoting new, unauthorized doctrines. Quakers promoted a simple way of life. They avoided fancy clothing, elaborate churches, and material excess. They were strongly pacifist, refusing to fight in wars or carry weapons, believing that all violence contradicted Jesus' teachings. I can respect many of their positions, even if I don't agree with all of them. Quakers were also radical for their time because they believed in the equality of all people, including women, Native Americans, and slaves. Women had equal rights in worship and decision-making, an extremely rare practice in the 1600s. To their credit, many Quakers became leaders in abolitionist movements, opposing slavery long before it was widely condemned. Because of these beliefs, Quakers were often persecuted, fined, imprisoned, and even executed in both England and the American colonies. In places like Puritan New England, Quakers were whipped, branded, and even hanged for their views. Doctor, could you please explain why on earth would Daniel Leeds be targeted by this community that was so often a target of others itself?
Well, Daniel published an annual book, the Leeds Almanac. This was an alternative to the Quaker-approved Farmer's Almanac. Now I know what you're thinking, what the heck is an almanac? Back then, almanacs were one of the most widely read publications in the American colonies and in Europe. They were annual handbooks filled with practical information, predictions, and even advice. Think of them as the social media or Google of the colonial era. A single book that provided everything from weather forecasts to astrological charts, farming tips, and even moral wisdom.
So wait, the religious Quakers had their own separate religiously approved almanac?
Yep, it was the Farmer's Almanac. They disliked Daniel Leeds' almanac because his works included astrological symbols, occult references, and even some mystical ideas, which Quaker leaders saw as dangerous and heretical. The Quakers accused him of collaborating with the devil and corrupting the minds of the colonists. His books were even publicly burned by some of the religious leaders.
Did Daniel repent and see the light, or the inner light, I guess?
He sure did not. Daniel Leeds responded by doubling down, openly criticizing the Quaker elite in his writings and aligning himself with the British crown, further alienating himself from his neighbors.
Wasn't there also something weird with his family crest that ties into all of this?
Here you go. Daniel Leeds did adopt a family crest that featured a wyvern, a bat-winged dragon-like creature.
Didn't this serpentine beast bear a striking resemblance to later descriptions of the Jersey Devil?
Man, why you gotta go there? Yes, but some believe that over time, local anti-Leeds propaganda twisted their family crest into some evil, linking the Leeds family and name with a demonic presence in the Pine Barrens. But things got real spicy after Daniel Leeds' death in 1720.
Didn't Daniel have some sons?
Yep, one would go on to marry Miss Deborah Smith, while the other, Mr. Titan Leeds, he would take over his daddy's Leeds Almanac and continue his father's feud with the Quakers and with the local political figures.
Man, you gotta admit, Titan is a beast name for a son.
Anyways, you'll never guess who gets tangled up in all of this next.
Spill the tea, Doc?
Well, Daniel's son Titan became embroiled in a bizarre rivalry with none other than Benjamin Franklin.
Wait, what? Like that Benjamin Franklin?
Yep, the founding father on your $100 bill, Ben Franklin. Ben was also publishing an almanac at the time. His was called Poor Richard's Almanac, and old Benny Boy was like you. He was nuclear levels of petty.
Hey, chill out. I don't need to let you on here. You're about to get booted. I'm going to be petty and steal your shine right now. Now remember that almanacs often contain predictions in them. Well, old Benny Boy mockingly predicted Titan's death in an early edition of his almanac.
If you know anything about Ben Franklin, you know he was a spicy meatball all the way around.
He was indeed. When Titan continued publishing after the petty predicted death date, Franklin pretended that Titan was a ghost, writing articles saying that Titan had actually died and was now a specter haunting the colonies.
Some of y'all think politicians trolling people is a modern-day creation.
Nope, they've been doing it for a long time, Doctor. Titan furiously defended himself, calling Franklin a fraud, but Franklin refused to acknowledge Titan as even alive. He continued to taunt him and write as if his rival was an undead spirit. This was way pettier than I've ever been.
I'll withhold my remarks so I don't get kicked off. This public back and forth created the strange image of Titan Leeds as a ghostly, cursed figure, further tarnishing the Leeds family name. Now, tying it all together, by the 1700s and early 1800s, the Leeds family name had been demonized, both figuratively and in the eyes of the superstitious settlers, literally. As tensions grew between the British loyalists and the American colonists, some saw the Leeds family as traitors because of their ties to the British crown. Locals began referring to the family and their land in the Pine Barrens as cursed, leading to rumors of a Leeds devil. Some historians believe early accounts of a winged beast terrorizing the region were actually a metaphor for the public's hatred of the Leeds family. They say that over time, the Leeds devil legend merged with pre-existing folklore, including Mother Leeds' 13th child, Native American myths, and European monster stories. By the 19th century, stories of a strange winged beast in the Pine Barrens became more common. When the Great Panic of 1909 swept through New Jersey, newspapers officially coined the name Jersey Devil, and the legend took on a life of its own after that.
I'm not going to offer a whole lot of pushback just yet. I know another idea that's been thrown around in modern times centers more around the Pine Barren region itself. The Pine Barrens of New Jersey were thick forests historically known as a haven for outcasts, poachers, moonshiners, and fugitives.
Oh, you'd fit right in.
Shut it! This has led some to suggest that the Jersey Devil myth was deliberately fabricated to deter people from discovering bootlegging and other nefarious illicit activities going on in the woods of New Jersey.
I hadn't heard that before, but I must say it sounds rather sensible, which is why I'm confused why it's coming out of your mouth.
That's because the notion that the myth was specifically created to protect bootlegging or other such operations lacks credible historical support, I'll have you know. The area's reputation for harboring unsavory characters may have contributed to the mystique and fear surrounding the region, potentially reinforcing the Jersey Devil legend. Nonetheless, the direct creation of the myth as a means of scaring people away from the region remains speculative and unsubstantiated. So what are we to make of all of this? The Doctor and I do agree more than we disagree this time around. I'm sure that's unsettling for him and for some of you. I do believe that all we've discussed thus far would allow us to dismiss the initial origin story of the beast.
Oh, praise the Lord of hosts, you must have seen some inner light yourself.
Calm down, I'm not finished.
Of course you're not.
I said I agree that the origin story sounds bunk. That doesn't mean I think the Pine Barrens doesn't have something in it, and that all those stories are purely fabricated.
God forbid you turn sensible overnight.
Sorry to disappoint, you're not the first and you won't be the last that I've disappointed. I think the Leeds family has nothing to do with the real Jersey Devil. I believe that this origin story of a woman giving birth to a cursed 13th child in the Jersey woods that transformed into a demonic beast is purely fictional. I agree with Dr. Wright that there's no evidence for any of that, and plenty of evidence to suggest that this family was targeted and attached to other legends and lore in the region to further run their names through the mud. But again, let me be clear, I'm not saying nothing was there, and that nothing is there now.
But we just demonstrated how all these stories came about. How could you still think something was out there?
Well, we haven't talked about all the details of all of them. We just discredited the origin, nor have we talked about the natives of the area just yet. The natives would not have known or cared about the drama with the Leeds family. But before the so-called Leeds Devil or the Jersey Devil, the Lenni Lenape tribe referred to that area of the Pine Barrens as Popoessing, which translates to the place of the dragon or the place of the serpent.
Please don't tell me you're going into your dragon nonsense again. Didn't you learn your lesson? You already scared enough people off.
Ouch, low blow, Doc. Don't worry, I don't think physical dragons have anything to do with the devil in the Pine Barrens. The Lenape people are an indigenous group native to the areas that now include New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and parts of New York. The term Popoessing suggests that the Lenape believed the area was associated with a dragon-like creature or spiritual being. While details about this creature are scarce, the reference indicates a mythical or supernatural presence in the region that not only predated the Leeds family, but predates any colonial settlement. Some scholars suggest that colonial settlers took the idea of the Lenape dragon and merged it with European folklore and tales of the Leeds family curse, giving rise to the modern legend of the Jersey Devil. One thing seems pretty clear to me, and that is this region has some weird stuff going on in it. With the Doctor, we've traced the origins of the Jersey Devil legend, we've dissected its historical roots, and exposed the political and religious conflicts that might have given birth to that story. But if we take the Leeds family out of the equation, we're still left with hundreds of years of sightings and encounters.
Buckle up, this is where he loses his mind. If the Jersey Devil ain't an animal, mutated child, or a hoax, then what is it?
I'm glad you finally asked. Whatever people have been seeing, whatever has been stalking the Pine Barrens for centuries, has clearly refused to disappear. And even more terrifying than that, it refuses to die. One of the most common supernatural interpretations is that the Jersey Devil is not a cryptid at all, but something demonic, as the name implies. If we look at the stories of people who have encountered it, there's a pattern that stands out immediately. Bullets and cannonballs pass right through it. It appears suddenly out of nowhere, sometimes just feet away, then vanishes without a trace. It lets out unearthly, bone-chilling screams. Doctor, you may appreciate this next one. No body or physical remains have ever been found. And even in modern accounts, people feel a deep, primal terror while in its presence.
You would too if you was lost in some creepy, cold, dark woods.
I don't think it's that simple, though. A lot of these accounts come from seasoned individuals. They were used to the woods. Some even had hardcore combat backgrounds. And several of them took shots that went right through it.
What most likely happened is they shot at an owl and they missed because they were spooked. We've already said they're nocturnal. They fly, and they can have creepy red eyes in the right light. Not to mention, some make some creepy noises all by themselves.
There you go, with everything is an owl again. Owls don't have legs with hooves. They don't leave all them tracks. They don't have bat-like wings or a horse or goat-like head. Not to mention the size of the Jersey Devil ranges from 6 to 10 feet with a wingspan of 10 to 12 feet, depending on who you ask. I don't think a bird, known or unknown, explains what people say they've seen or what they've shot at. All these things seem to suggest, as the name implies, it's a devil, a demonic entity, a spiritual being that manifests physically, but it's not bound by the laws of nature or the physical world. Hence the appearing and disappearing, the things passing through it, walking up walls. If that's the case, the real question may not be what it is, but why it's there. Is it a territorial spirit claiming the Pine Barrens as its domain? Is it a deception luring people into fear and superstition? Or could it be a demonic sentry tied to something even darker hidden in the pines?
What on earth are you going on about? Territorial spirits?
Across cultures, there are stories of places that hold a dark presence, lands that seem to trap spirits or become permanent homes for the supernatural. Skinwalker legends in the American Southwest describe entities that stalk certain regions, tied to ancient curses. The Bell Witch haunting in Tennessee centered around a land-bound spirit that tormented a certain family. Even the Bible references regions of spiritual strongholds, lands that were defiled by wickedness and remained places of demonic influence. I'm simply asking the question, could the Pine Barrens be one of those places? A place where something old and dark has taken root. A land with a spirit that does not want outsiders encroaching on its territory.
You better have something to back all this up.
We already mentioned that even the Native American Lenape people seemed to believe this place was different. As we said, long before the colonists and the Leeds family, the Lenape tribe inhabited New Jersey. And what did they call the Pine Barrens? Popoessing, the place of the dragon. Not the place of the deer, not the place of the rivers, the place of the dragon. Which means they knew something about this land before the Europeans ever stepped foot in it. We don't have a ton of information from this tribe about how the region acquired the name, but these types of beings, these serpent-like beings, are often tied to chaos and the spirit realm. In many cultures, these serpentine creatures are associated with evil, with deception and destruction.
Well, it ain't in the Bible.
The Bible itself describes Satan as a dragon, a serpent in the garden that twists and distorts the truth. The book of Revelation speaks of a great dragon cast down to earth, deceiving the nations. Both very much evil beings from the spirit world, both very much capable of interacting with the physical one. The ancient Mesopotamians feared the chaos serpent Tiamat, a force of destruction and disorder. The Lenape people might have seen something in the Pine Barrens, something ancient, something dangerous. And if that's true, then the Jersey Devil isn't a cryptid. It's something far, far worse. There's another disturbing pattern in the Jersey Devil encounters. I mentioned it before I was rudely interrupted. The fact that physical attacks do nothing to it. This is a hallmark of certain supernatural beings in the Bible and other ancient texts. There's always one particular passage that comes to mind, Ephesians 6:12. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. In Season 1, Episode 8, we talked about all the various terms used in that passage. I know it's been a while, so here's a refresher. Paul warned the Ephesians about the various evil spirits of all levels of power and authority in the spiritual world. The archos, from arche, means rulers or princes, hence why you'll often hear them called principalities. These are extremely high-ranking demonic entities. There is a high-ranking fallen being in Daniel 10 we've mentioned many times called the Prince of Persia. He's an example of this. There's actually two in that passage. The other one is the Prince of Greece.
But those could just be normal human leaders, normal princes and rulers.
No, actually, they can't be. We've already exposited that passage at length to demonstrate it's not talking about human rulers. How do we know, in short? Well, the Prince of Persia is able to confine one of God's holy angels, who was on his way to deliver a message to Daniel. Many believe it to have been Gabriel, and Michael the archangel is sent to set him free. I know a lot of demonic politicians, their ideas certainly go against God's message, but I don't know any of them that could actually confine one of his messengers. So the archos, these are beings responsible to oversee vast territories and lead spiritual campaigns. Satan, the devil himself, in Ephesians 2:2, is called the prince of the power of the air. Arcanata is used, a form of the noun archon, ruler or prince. What does it mean that he is called the prince and power of the air? What domain is that? In the ancient Hellenistic mind, the eros, the air, would have referred to the atmosphere or the space between the earth and the heavens. It was associated with the unseen spiritual world. The air was thought to be the domain of spiritual beings, both good and evil. Paul's use of this phrase reflects the belief that the demonic realm operates in this middle space, and Satan is a ruler of these other spiritual beings that operate in the spiritual world. This is further demonstrated in Ephesians 6:12 at the end of the verse when Paul summarizes the powers of darkness when he says, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places. This lines up well with the traditional view that Satan, the devil, is the chief bad guy of the Bible. The New Testament does affirm this. We've said many times that many err in assuming he's acting alone, though, or that he's the only major player. The next word of spiritual authority Paul uses in Ephesians 6 is exousias. The term exousias derives from exousia, meaning authority or power. It implies delegated authority to act or exercise control. It's often rendered as powers or authorities. I've said to think of them as mid-ranking operatives functioning as lieutenants or captains, implementing strategies and overseeing specific operations. These beings operate under the command of the archos, carrying out their directives, and the archos operate under Satan. We know the Jersey Devil isn't Satan. He isn't the devil. Definite article, right? But is it possible that this being is one of these powers or authorities operating under Satan or one of his lieutenants acting against God and his image bearers? I do believe this is a possibility. Even the fact that he's seemingly tied to a particular area very much fits into the biblical motifs of the kingdom of darkness.
Just say you think he's a demon and move on already. Good night.
Well, but that's an oversimplification, Doctor, which is partly why we have such an incomplete view of the spiritual world. He is not a traditional low-level demon like those seen in the Gospels. He's no disembodied spirit of a dead Nephilim because the Jersey Devil is not found possessing anyone. The closest thing is his origin and the transformation, but we already discredited that. He has a form, so he has no need to use anyone else's. Now, the final term used in Ephesians 6 is kosmokratoros. The term is a compound created from cosmos, world, and kratoros, ruler or controller. The title implies rulers of world systems or cosmic order. The term is unique to Ephesians 6:12, so kosmokratoros is a hapax legomenon of the New Testament. I haven't talked about that in a while. A hapax legomenon is a word that appears only once in the entire text, and typically is not found in any other text for comparison. This term seems to highlight a specific role in overseeing global systems of darkness. In this case, far too high to be our Jersey Devil, in my opinion. These forces are thought to be spiritual entities manipulating societal, political, or cultural systems to spread darkness, sin, and rebellion against Yahweh. Many see them as the overarching rulers of world affairs under Satan. often linked to systematic evils like oppression, corruption, and false religions. When we first talked about them, we said perhaps one created Marxism, another created Islam, and a large blue hair one might have created modern feminism. These entities are responsible for manipulating global systems, political, economic, cultural, and religious, all in the attempt of furthering the agenda of darkness. Like I said, too high to be in the woods of Jersey. Though the big event that happened in 1909 may be the only thing that challenges my theory.
Look, 1909 wasn't the age of cryptids, it was the age of tabloid journalism. You know what really sells newspapers? Not the weather, not politics. Flying demons terrorizing New Jersey, that's what sells papers.
That's fair, Doctor, but entire towns were shut down in fear of this creature.
And in 1938, the radio broadcast of War of the Worlds had people literally thinking Martians were invading New Jersey too. People panicked. They ran for their lives. Some even armed themselves. Did that mean aliens landed, Nellie? No. It means people in Jersey are just really good at freaking out over scary headlines.
Hey, you can attack me, but don't attack the good people of New Jersey.
I wouldn't be so sure. You ever seen that show about their shore?
Hey, chill out. But to answer your question, no, I'd rather die than watch that show. I don't think we can say 1909 was just people panicking over shadows. There were countless sightings. There were footprints all over the place, and some of them going up and down walls. What about the hunters, the hikers, the cops who said they saw something in those woods?
Well, maybe Jersey tourism needed a boost. Maybe some bored kids got creative, or maybe, just maybe, it's the same thing that it's always been, a whole lot of nothing. There's no ancient demon in them woods, no cursed child, no interdimensional horse lizard man. Just a really good ghost story. A few spooky shadows, and a bunch of people who love to be scared.
All right then. Let me ask you one last thing, Doctor.
Go ahead, I love winning arguments.
If you're so sure the Jersey Devil isn't real, why don't you go camping in the Pine Barrens alone?
Would you look at the time? Weren't you going to finish talking about Ephesians 6? Get back to work.
Okay, sure, Doctor, sure. Let's go back to Ephesians 6. The Cosmocratoros seem to influence humanity on a macro scale. They steer societal values, ideologies, and movements away from God and away from His truth. It would appear that many have focused their efforts on the West for the last 50 years or so, though thankfully the tides are turning here in America, though Europe is another story altogether.
I think you're reading too much into all of this, obsessing over devils and glorifying the powers of darkness, Nellie.
Ouch, more low blows? Really, Doc? I might have to give you the Musk treatment and fire you quick. Paul said in 2 Corinthians 2:11 that we are not to be outwitted by Satan or ignorant of his designs. Paul doesn't want us to be ignorant of the devil's schemes, his intentions. The word noemata also gets translated as devices. The best sports teams get familiar with how their opponents are going to operate before facing them, and Paul wanted us to be aware of how our enemies operate that we might face them and their cohorts and overcome them in Jesus' name. Also, those that ignore this hierarchy, like you, Doctor, unwittingly exalt Satan.
Wow!
The way you think about him and talk about him makes him sound way more powerful than he actually is. Yahweh doesn't need anything or anyone to carry out his plans and his will. The devil is not God, though, so he is not omnipotent, nor is he omnipresent, nor is he even omniscient. So Satan, the devil, needs an entire administration to carry out his dark agenda. Those that only speak of the devil give him way too much credit. If there is a being residing in the Pine Barrens, this fallen spiritual being, the Jersey Devil, works for the devil. At what level? We can only speculate. Paul said we battle not against flesh and blood. People have apparently been shooting at the Jersey Devil for centuries and never bringing it down. It fits perfectly into this category of not flesh and blood. In my opinion, it isn't an animal. It isn't some lost creature. It isn't some lab monstrosity. It's something else entirely.
Don't you get upset when I call everything demonic?
I have said before, I don't like when everything that's misunderstood gets labeled as demonic, yes, but I've also told you that if the shoe fits, it's got to wear it. And this is a hoof size 4, I think. This thing hasn't been labeled the Jersey Angel. It's been called the Jersey Devil for a reason. I'm not saying it's demonic because it scares people. We've said many times that the good guys are scary too, or at least people are afraid of them when they appear. I'm not even saying it's demonic because it's ugly. The descriptions of this creature are not conventionally attractive, to say the least, but there are beings around God's throne that, though awe-inspiring, are not what I would call beautiful, especially the ones covered in eyes. I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but it grosses me out every time I think about it. When dealing with people, Jesus said, "By their fruits they shall be known." I treat spiritual beings the same way. By their fruits you shall know them. Is there anything about this being that is pointing people to Yahweh, the one true God? Is there anything about this being and its behavior that is leading people to the Messiah, to Jesus? No on both accounts, folks. Is there anything about this being that is beneficial to human beings or human flourishing? Hebrews says that angels are spiritual beings who serve those who will inherit salvation. How many accounts of Jersey Devil encounters speak of this creature helping an old lady across the street, or anything benevolent for that matter? The answer is 0. I don't want to fall into the trap of the doctor and label everything a demon. But when we're dealing with sentient beings, human or heavenly, I believe you will know them by their fruits, by their deeds.
Well, technically, it never hurt nobody.
This is a fair point, though all who encounter it have been afraid. Only one account mentions any violence inflicted. That was the bogus Mama Leeds birth account we started off with. Since we pretty much discredited that story, we have no record of it causing actual direct physical harm. But not physically harming people is not the same as helping people. If there is something in those woods, this thing isn't helping people at all. In counseling people who have dealt with demons and spiritual oppression, most cases, by no means all, but most deal with mental attacks more than physical. And those that have seen this creature are troubled for quite some time after. It marks them. For those who have suggested that it was some kind of guardian spirit looking out for the woods themselves, I don't buy into that. But we have talked about the possibility that certain spiritual beings are placed over certain places, i.e. territorial spirits. We have also discussed in the past being potentially placed over forces of nature. This has been a long-held view throughout the Judeo-Christian world. In Revelation 7, we see angels controlling the winds, and in Revelation 6, there is a mention of one possibly over the waters. I don't personally believe that interpretation of the creature fits here per se. The woods are not a force of nature, but the Pine Barrens in New Jersey are physical locations that may have beings operating over them and within them. Some may find this offensive, but you'll get over it. The tribal beliefs in the region were pagan and demonic. While the Lenape people believed in a single creator, they called him Kishilamukong. They also revered and honored many Manatuak, spiritual beings associated with nature, animals, and locations. Though the Bible does support the idea of lesser spiritual beings being placed over places and things, it rejects the idea of lesser spirits influencing the world in a way that requires veneration or ritual appeasement of these beings. The Bible actually warns against the veneration or worship of all other spirits and spiritual beings. The worship of any being other than Yahweh is considered idolatry and is strictly forbidden. So too is the belief of animism. The Lenape people not only believed in spirits, they saw everything in nature as having a spirit. Trees, rivers, animals, stones, even the wind. These spirits needed to be respected and sometimes even needed to be appeased to maintain balance. The Bible teaches that nature is God's creation, but it is not divine. Again, I know some are not going to like this, but the idea of seeking guidance from nature, spirits, or ancestral forces is a demonic, pagan practice that I believe opened the door to demonic deception for the native people of New Jersey and the surrounding area.
Whoa, Nelly, you really hit a bee's nest now.
I've said before I'm not concerned with political correctness. Deuteronomy 32:17 couldn't be clearer. They sacrificed to demons who were not God, to gods whom they had not known, new gods who came lately, whom your fathers did not dread. Another verse that is crucial to our show and to understanding where we're coming from that we talked about at length in the first season. The one and only creator of the universe is Yahweh, not Keshelemukong. And yes, Yahweh did make other lesser spiritual beings, but Deuteronomy 32 tells us that many of them rebelled and sought to deceive Yahweh's image bearers. The Lenape are one of hundreds of people groups who fell for the demonic deception.
What does this all have to do with the Jersey Devil?
I'm glad you finally asked. He's more than likely one of the many rebellious spiritual beings that deceived the natives. But as Christianity began to take root in America, this being and those like him lost power and influence. The behaviors and the practices of the natives were largely demonic. Some tribes in America had glimpses of truth, things we'll definitely touch on in future episodes, but the vast majority of Native American religion was demonic, pagan animism. I'm not questioning their sincerity, folks, but sincerity is not a valid measure of truth. I'm not saying it's all make-believe either, quite the contrary. I took you to Deuteronomy 32 to prove I don't think it's make-believe. I believe many of the tribes had actual spiritual encounters, and encounters with spirit beings from the spirit world, but without Christ and without the Holy Spirit, they lacked the ability to discern that which was holy from that which was profane. Some believed in many gods, some believed that everything was God. Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me." The Bible declares there is one God and one mediator between God and man, the man Christ Jesus. As we prepare to close, my overall thesis, what I'm suggesting, is that it was the pagan practices of many indigenous people that brought spiritual darkness upon the lands, not just in New Jersey. But when Christ and the gospel arrived, his light shone in the darkness. Now I know as soon as I say that, some people's eyes are going to roll. Not all claiming Christ behaved in a Christ-like way. I'm not naive. That's true today as well. But it doesn't change the reality of the Bible or the reality of the gospel. That raises another question. Last one. Is the Jersey Devil still there? We haven't seen a mass sighting event like the Great Panic of 1909 in a long time, but that doesn't mean it's gone. If this is a spiritual entity, then it doesn't age, it doesn't die, it doesn't move on. It simply waits for the right conditions to manifest again. There are still many who report interactions with the Jersey Devil to this day. A question that I get often that I don't believe I've talked about on the show enough is, should we be looking for these creatures? Should Christians participate in cryptid hunting? Some may like my answer, some may not. I'd say it depends on the creature that you're looking for. You got the time, bullets, and resources to go look for Mokele Mbembe in the Congo? I'd say go for it. Should you venture to New Jersey, though, and look for the Jersey Devil? If I'm right about what he is, then no, you shouldn't. Absolutely not. You shouldn't be looking for the devil, or any devil for that matter. The apostles never shrunk back from the kingdom of darkness, but they never went looking for it either. You're free to disagree with me. Perhaps you're like Dr. Wright and you think it could be an animal. If that's your conviction, if you have the courage to brave the barrens, I'm not going to stop you or judge you. I just shared with you what I think it is and why I think it is that, but I'm no expert. I'm not the final authority on these things. No one is. Some may think it's some kind of Enochian hybrid creature. Heck, it may be. You may be right. But I suppose if that's the case, you also shouldn't go looking for it. In any case, Paul said this in 1 Corinthians 10:31. Whether you eat or drink, whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. May that be your chief motivation for whatever you choose to do. On top of that, even if the Jersey Devil isn't real, Satan very much is. And so too are all the other fallen heavenly beings that the Bible speaks of, and they are bent on your deception, your destruction. The deceiving and the destroying of Yahweh's image bearers is their goal. Jesus said that the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy. The Jersey Devil is tame compared to the devil. He isn't an evil red-skinned Keebler elf-looking creature with a pitchfork and a curled mustache. He is a powerful, fallen heavenly being that Paul said comes disguised as an angel of light. The worst attacks, my friends, aren't levied by winged creatures with hooves and horns, but the ones wrapped in a little bit of truth and fabricated compassion meant to slowly, subtly lead you away from Christ, from the way, the truth, and the life, and from His Word. Not sure how long we've gone, but I think this is as good a place as any to wrap this one up. If you're disappointed that I didn't go into the Hebrew se'irim in this episode, the word that's typically translated as goat demons or satyrs, just know I'm saving that one for its own episode. Who knows, it might even be the one we get into next week. You know, I love our deep dives. I love asking questions, I love seeking answers, and I love doing that even more when I can do that with you and even with Dr. Wright. Please continue to like, share, follow, review, subscribe, do all the things wherever you consume the Dancing Toaster, but whatever you do, don't consume toasters, and don't let the Jersey Devil consume you. I love you. I'm out.
Report suspicious activities and call 911 for immediate response. Expect delay.
Nobody else moving tags in from the south. Stand by.
Flight 022. Maintain approach. You're clear for runway.
Expect traffic delays and restrictions. Take personal security precautions to avoid becoming a victim of an attack. Avoid crowded public areas and gatherings.
Airbus 27 maintaining northbound runway 8 kilo holding.
Do not travel in areas affected by the attack or in a known area of elevated virus activity. Keep emergency supplies accessible and a full tank of gas at all times.
Be careful.
Government officials